Hi everyone. Sorry I can't be at the conference. I hope it's a really wonderful conference. It looks fantastic going by the program, and that you're having a really great time in London. I'm still in Melbourne, Australia, hence the recorded presentation. And really, this is an opportunity for me to talk about a particular project I'm doing, which is an example of how I use inefficient mapping in kind of different ways. So, in my own practice, I have a drawing practice and I also have a stitching practice. And sometimes I do those things separately, but in this project, I actually use both those practices. And the project is about countermapping the British Empire. And really, what it's going to be is a collection of works that examine each of the countries in the world that were once colonised but have since become independent from British rule. And that is because, as an artist and as a scholar, I'm really interested in examining examining those counter narratives of colonial history. You can hear probably from my accent that I am British and I was brought up in Britain. And I can say that we don't British school children, certainly when I was young, didn't really get those kind of critical engagements with coloniality, and certainly British coloniality in our very dubious history of kind of commandeering different places. And so this is a kind of collection of works. It's a long-term project. It's going to take me a couple of years to finish, and it will result in about 180 works, all up on those parts of the world that have distanced themselves and freed themselves from British rule. And so um, I'm interested in how inefficient mapping can be used in this particular project, is a kind of methodology for kind of organising the whole project, but also then through the practices of drawing and textiles and stitching, I actually enact creatively inefficient mapping through those practices. The front slide here is one of the examples of the drawn works. What I'm using are repurposed objects, so I'm using domestic textiles. I use those a lot in my textile-based work. And in this project, I'm also using a repurposed atlas. And this allows me to present two different visualizations. And of course, the kind of meanings associated with each of the kind of objects as well, and what they associate. As a child, I was really fascinated with maps and atlases. I really liked the kind of aesthetics of the map, and I still do. But as I've got older and I've read more critically, I kind of examine what they stand for as well. And the particular appearance of these maps and why they were made, why they were developed, who used them, who benefited from them, and who certainly didn't benefit from them. So the map is a kind of ubiquitous object of colonisation, and the atlas certainly can be an object of an object that actually kind of exemplifies, illustrates to young people, like children in school, for example. They can kind of really exemplify areas of control, and the reasons why countries and lands were taken. So, for example, in an atlas at the beginning section, you'll have this kind of range of geographical lands on pages, and they'll go by kind of continents and things like that. But then later on in an atlas, you'll also have maps of that are kind of uh, they're organized by their kind of agricultural potential or their political kind of leanings, temperature gauges. There's all these different kind of schematics that are used to kind of interpret lands, and of course that had certain advantages and purposes for people who were kind of using lands, irrespective of their traditional custodians or the kind of indigenous nations that were already living there, how the lands themselves would be commandeered and used for profit and gain. Various kind of extractive purposes. So all of these things kind of make the atlas a very interesting object for me. And so the kind of counter mapping I've taken quite literally into this project, and I thought you might be interested to see some of this. So I'll just move my to the next slide. So here are some sorry, I'm managing the screen. So here are some pages, other pages from the atlas. And what happens is I have a list of about 90 countries, which come from the Oxford Atlas, and it is a kind of big data resource. And I'm very interested in big data and kind of thinking with big data and how big data can be kind of interrogated in different ways, and certainly through artistic works. And so this big data is the kind of information on years, the kind of renaming the toponymic practices, the kind of places in the world, the regions, climates and so on and so forth, and how lands might be clustered. So for example, particularly in the West Indies, how places were clustered into ownership islands, and so they're and again beyond the control of the original inhabitants. And so as I'm working through the list of 90 places, I find them in the atlas. I find where they appear in the atlas, and if you think of the prior slide, that is what we know now as Queensland as a state in Australia, which was originally a country, a colony place when Cook came in and colonised Australia. And you'll see here there's another page where it's kind of partially included in a map because the scale is kind of altered on this page. You'll also see here various islands in the West Indies, and some of these are already being kind of mapped over. And so what happens is, as I approach each country, I do a stitched work, which I'll show you shortly, and then I find the pages in the map, and they are covered in blue, and I'm using slightly different tones of blue for each one. And over a period of time, the pages in the map will become obliterated by these blue grounds. And over the top of the blue grounds, you can see the drawn marks of the mapping, and they are movement maps. And what I do is I capture the kind of movement and the vitality and animacy of the place as it is now. And so I find film of those places, and I map the movements that I see in the film of those places. And the kinds of things I map can be vegetal, so kind of landscapes and organic matter. They can be wildlife, and they can be people. And so and water as well. So the kind of different kind of geographic components that are present in this place now, today. The atlas is from the early 80s, and so that is helpful in some ways, me find, because boundaries change, and that's really interesting. So I have to kind of um, carefully mark out the land as it was the year of independence. So I'm not mapping, the blue blocking is representative of the year the country released itself and extracted itself from British rule. And of course, those boundaries change over time as new things emerge for each of those countries. But what I attempt to do on the map is to kind of block out if the, for example, in so Barbados, for example, in 1966 gained independence. So I find a 1966 map of Barbados, and then I make sure that I can duplicate that within the pages of this map, within the pages of this atlas in the blue marking. And then overlaid are the kind of gestural marks of movement and animacy. And the reason I chose blue is it is the kind of the colour of freedom and liberty, and it's why the UN is chooses blue as its colour. And so there are different colours of blue, and that is an aesthetic decision. So as I start to block in, for example, in this map of Australia, New South Wales will, what is now the state of New South Wales, will also be coloured in. So to show difference, I will choose different kinds of blues to kind of identify those blocks of colour still. And the movement mappings will slowly be overlaid and kind of make a very complex kind of vibrancy over the top of these very flat geographic cartographies. And so I'll move now to the next one. And so these are two examples of the textile works. So these also feature the mapping marks, the geographic space, if you like, the land. And at the bottom, you can see there is the date of the independence. And each of these textiles is made from domestic textile wear. So these are tea towels, you can probably tell. And some of these I dye to help with the kind of contrast of the land over the top of the kind of surface to make the land really stand out. I don't do this with all the textiles, and I've got some examples later that I'll show you that are on just the undyed textiles. But they are, everything in this is made from the domestic, reclaimed, repurposed textile, with the exception of the felt letters. The felt letters are in a kind of, historically in Britain, we used this kind of maroon colour for official documentation, and this is Times New Roman. So it refers to that kind of officiation, ceremonial acts that Britain used to kind of make legal these very legal kind of invasions, and that by creating a document of it, it became, in the eyes of the British, a legal kind of possession. And so this is a kind of reference to that kind of governmentality and the kind of documentation as official kind of a permission to actually wade into different lands and just take them over. And this was often on behalf of the crown, of course, historically, to report back to the crown, kind of officiated the process. And so there will be a series of these textiles hanging. Yeah, they are. I like the fact that they are misshaped. They're kind of abject. Um, and what I'm interested in with this part of the work and with all my textiles is the kind of contrast between the domestic image and the absolute violence of the act. I am particularly interested and explore white women's complicity in colonial acts. And white women historically were positioned in certain ways within the kind of colonial discourse, seen as the kind of good wife accompanying the brave pioneer, and the brave kind of experiences of managing wild landscapes and wildlife and different climates, and like in kind of local people, and the fact that local people were always seen as um, potential threats to the white woman, and her being very brave and dutiful, and being this kind of gentle creature. And of course, the research that I do for my projects, I do a lot of historical research into the kind of governmental organizations that were implanted into these colonized countries, and that women were often employed to uphold acts, parliamentary and government acts, that were quite violent towards indigenous and local people. As an example, another work that I did is on women's white complicity in upholding kind of child removal policies in Australia. And children were placed in Australian homes and farms, homesteads, sheep stations, all those kinds of things. It was an incredibly violent kind of displacement of children from their families. And the women were kind of enacted to uphold those laws and keep the children in their homes. So as an artist, I'm very interested in that very deep, contestable space whereby women would make protective objects for their home and make quilts for their children, and have all of these kind of pastoral images of lands and travel, kind of homages to good places in their in their kitchens and in their living rooms in these domestic textiles. You can see the imagery here. These are both from their British destinations that you might go to on your holidays or just on a day out or something. And they kind of give this very kind of demure, kind of gentle image of the domestic space. But of course, in contrast, white women were enacting just as much as men the acts of colonial violence and control, and various other acts that they upheld. And so the stitching is the act of stitching is slow, it's purposeful, and again it is that contrast of repeated stabbing and stitching to generate this kind of subverted, protective, domestic image. And it places women in those colonial lands as well. And it's also for me a very deep commitment to reparative work as a white woman, and the histories that I must recognise and that I've had, and my people, my mob, my other white women have been a part of. And so this kind of the inefficient mapping here is about, it's not the kind of gestural mark making that you would see in the drawn works. But what it does do is it's the translation of lands. Everything is slightly lost as I trace out shapes. They become slightly less accurate, and then they are traced onto textile. You can see here they're kind of doilies and like cloth, tablecloths and things like that. handkerchiefs, all of those types of things. So these very small textiles. And this process of cutting them into cloth and then stitching them, there's this kind of morphing and changing. And so it is extremely inefficient. But it is that process of change and morphing and altering that I'm really interested in, and and what I sit with as I produce these works. And so the kind of cloths are a little bit they're not very durable. They kind of disintegrate. They're quite precarious, and so all of this stuff is rather than me making some kind of nice um, like a quilt or something nice that's protective. These are kind of forcing me to think about my place and the place of other white women in these colonial histories. And so what will happen over the course of the project is, you can see here's another spread, and this is British Borneo, as it was. British Borneo it gained independence in 1984. What's interesting about this is it has become, as is the case with different parts of the world, there are different countries within that blue land, that blue space now, and that's because things continue to change for those countries post independence. And you can see here there's a tiny snapshots of other countries. In the bottom right is the very, very top part of Queensland. And in the top left, you can see Bangladesh, just a small part of Bangladesh. And so you can kind of start to see the ways in which a mapping is... how would I put this? You can see how there are kind of different orientations to colonisation. The ways in which lands were chosen due to many different reasons. They're often on the trade routes. They're often to protect sailing routes and certain waters that were good for passage. And to commandeer them from other colonizing nations. And we know that these kind of islands, such as the islands in the Asia Pacific, were commandeered by all different other colonizing countries, and for different reasons. But kind of overlaying those reasons was the kind of disregard for the land as a place that was already inhabited and had a long history of kind of culture, spiritual, kind of environmental identity, and was just merely commandeered for either its location or its richness in certain or its provisions of wood, like and timber and things like that. So what could be extracted from it. So those were the reasons. No kind of interest in its kind of people or their cultural histories. And so this kind of is an inefficient mapping of the very complex reasons and the complex histories of each of these places. And so the approach, as with all my inefficient mapping, is a protocol. I follow a protocol. I'll just show you the next one. And so the protocol, I don't know if any of you have read the work, but this kind of huge body of data is almost impossible to kind of summarize simply. You could just keep going on and on and on with this amount of this body of big data on all of the countries that have been colonized, how they've been colonized, the nature of the colonization, the reasons for it, the kind of acts, the what happened during colonization, the years. So it just goes on and on and on. The dimensions of interpretation are just huge, and so the to for me that is a really interesting space to be in, to think about an inefficient mapping of it. So I don't attempt to be kind of regular with the data itself. What I enact are protocols to kind of dive in and to kind of produce a research project that celebrates the partiality, that kind of raises our understandings of not being in control of everything as humans, that the world is excessive all the time, and that these kind of excesses can be present, can be kind of noted and acknowledged, and be understood as always exceeding how we might want to kind of organize them and summarize them. And that is really that's really what I'm interested in as a researcher, in terms of kind of understanding that it is always a failing project, and the kind of claims to summarize and essentialize and produce truths in research is really a very false claim. And so all of my work is, as an artist, I'm interested in the kind of tensions of practice, meaning, an idea. But as a researcher, I'm really interested in the politics of research and the claims that we have for truth, and kind of and capturing the whole picture. And so the situation is huge. It's messy. It's kind of uncontrollable in lots of ways. And so in my book, I talk about how a protocol is used very much in arts practice, and there are many other practices that use protocols. And what it is, it's a way of responding to excessive situations whereby you can't, where you're not in control. And so there's where you've got people working in excessive situations. So, for example, emergency services, where you cannot know what is going to be the outcome, and it's a kind of unpredictable situation with lots of excessive contexts or details. The protocols kind of help to walk into that space and do something with it. And so, as I say, lots of professions like emergency services have protocols. And artists also use protocols to kind of work with the excessive and unpredictable situation. And so I enact protocols for all of my projects. And in this one, in countermapping the British Empire, obviously I have sourced a list of countries that were once colonised by the British, and part of the British Empire, and have since released themselves, freed themselves from that restriction, and so that's the first kind of thing, was to find a list, and then my protocol is to pick a place, find a domestic cloth for the background, find some domestic textiles to put together, stitch together, or you cut out from for the landmass. Place that on and stitch it. So then I also find an image, a visual image of the landmass at that date of release. So I don't find contemporary maps. I do image searches for the country in that year. So again, Barbados 1966, or Anglo-Egyptian Sudan 1956. And so those countries have since changed in terms of their organisation and leadership and so forth. But I find an image of the country the year it was no longer part of the British Empire, and that's what I use to make the map, the land shape as that you can see here in the white on the back, on the in front of the tea towel. So I trace that on, then I stitch it onto the tea towel. I cut out the letters and iron them on so they are not stitched, they're basted on and iron fused on. And then I move to the atlas, and I find all the pages in the atlas where that land is, even if it's only the tiniest corner, the tiniest sliver, and I block those out, and then I find video imagery of the land as it is today, and I move from page to page and actually map the movements using my gestural drawing in efficient mapping technique. And so I follow that protocol through the list and create these works. And so the protocol is incredibly important to me because it kind of supports the way of working with that massive, complex, almost unending data source, and it also then foregrounds different things. So this is also the point of it is, and it's always the point of it with all my projects, is the data becomes more than just the kind of numbers, organizations, details, that kind of thing. So the data is more, it's more than just the information. It's actually about those kind of critical texts that sit around, the critical histories, the politics, the kind of the discourses, all of those kind of meta aspects of the world that we're in, and how we think of the world. And so data is one way of thinking of the world, but it's incredibly neutral. And even when it thinks about political leanings, or the list that I first sourced, which is about countries once under British rule, it's an organisation of information, but there is very little in terms of critical engagement with that topic in the data. And so for me, it's about kind of, in my particular case, it's about the reparative work and sitting meaningfully with those histories. It also plants me right in the situation. So it is about, the reparative work is about being involved, not standing back and just analysing and being out of the picture. And so doing this kind of, the protocol kind of opens up time and space for that kind of political, critical work with these kind of histories and topics. And given that most of my work is about countermapping colonial histories and colonial narratives, that's for me is extremely important. So it's more than just relaying dates and standing back and conveying something as if I have no kind of relationship with that information. So it's about kind of being right in the centre of it, and acknowledging that that must be the case when we're doing proper reparative work. So I will flick through some of these images here. I think with the atlas, it's also, for me, there's the kind of physicality of that huge book. As a child, kneeling on the floor, we had an atlas at home when I was young, and it was probably our biggest book. It was really big. I couldn't carry it when I was very young. I had to have one of my parents lay it on the floor and kneeling over it and looking at the big pages. And it was just very enticing, but not really understanding what I was looking at as a young child. But that kind of love of the kind of physicality, the hugeness of a large atlas is still very attractive. And so that is, kind of working on these images, these cartographic projections, as really, it brings back all of those memories of really being curious about these places that were represented in this way, this kind of cartographic way, what they were really like. And so here's another example of how the countries are starting to collect. And as I work through more of the list, then more of these places will start to be blocked out. And then the atlas will be very kind of worked on. It'll be very kind of, it won't be a nice flat book. It will have a lot of impressions in the pages. I also get like a kind of relief printing on the other pages, because the mapping can be quite forceful, and it causes the graphite to kind of imprint on other pages. So there's a lot of kind of there's a lot of movement in that data, and there's a lot of kind of additional things that happens, that to me really represents the vibrancy of life and time, and it is that complexity and the richness that I'm really interested in. Here's one of a textile that isn't dyed, and this one is Pakistan. And you can see here, I didn't dye this one because I thought the contrast of that kind of celebration of war and the patriotism in this image. It's such a rich image, that I just thought, that it's just got layers and layers of association, and it makes for an interesting kind of discussion piece, I think. And again, another one here. So some of them I dye. This the textile on the top is dyed with tea, which was another big reason for colonizing countries, was to do with the kind of exporting of plants and local produce. And tea is huge to Britons. And so, and you'll notice with this cloth underneath, these are also images of those places as souvenirs. So there's all these layerings of the kind of re-identifying land for white purposes. So the land, so for example, in Australia, we have tea towels, like souvenir tea towels of lands that were kind of that are incredibly spiritual and important places for local Indigenous Aboriginal Australian people. But after they were colonised, they became like sheep or cattle stations, on sites of mining, or like hydro systems, and then ski fields, beaches. And these are the images that were printed on these domestic textiles. And so the white folks would tour around Australia and buy a souvenir textile and take it home. And this is a kind of complete reinscription of the land, and just no acknowledgement of that in these images. And so these are things I collect and use in these types of projects. And And you see the white, this originally was white, and the stitching is called white work, and it's white thread on white textile, wet white cotton, and the designs were cut into to the cotton and stitched around, so it's cut work and white work. Excuse me. And again, it's all about that delicacy and the femininity, and that contrast of that seemingly delicate feminine act of stitching these soft, gentle designs, and they're into textiles, while at the same time enacting these incredible, violent colonial rules, and supporting that and being complicit in it through not doing anything but going along with it. So it's that contrasting, the contrasting situation, which is of interest to me. I also use very stained, because of there's obviously the obvious association with the stained image, and so these are these are of great interest to me. The kind of the textiles that have got like grease marks, and they often have wax, because they're from an era when candles were used more than electricity. Some of the textiles I find are quite old, and they often, and I'm always on the lookout. So if you have some of these at home, please send them. So particularly ones that have holes in them or a stain, ones that you can't really use for anything else, I would love them. So please do let me know if you have some like this. And you can see here, this is Bangladesh, and how these layers of textile work kind of present on the surface an image of femininity, but actually convey the things that they convey are extremely different. And just more pages from the atlas there. So I am going to stop. I'm running out of air. Keep coughing. But I hope this has been interesting. And I put my work up on my website. This work is detailed in there, and it's an ongoing project. So as yet, I've had one work here and there in different shows, but essentially this will be a large collection that I will show at the end of the project. And I, as a scholar, I also write about this work as well, so that will be done at the end of the project. But hopefully, in terms of the session, and thinking about inefficient mapping, hopefully it showed you the different ways you can kind of take up inefficient mapping. So there's the kind of through the protocol, there's through the practices. They don't always have to be drawn practices. I mean, that's how I use them, but it's certainly not how you might use them. So the kind of the things to think about are those two words. How is it inefficient? How is it kind of working with complexity without trying to capture and distill? And perhaps what are your protocols for your project, and how do they help you be present in a much bigger situation that is complex and unpredictable and excessive? And what kind of ways can you either organize your project through this inefficient mapping of, or how can you practice mapping inefficiently? So here the drawings are is a kind of practice of mapping, but very different to the cartographic images underneath them. But the protocol is also is the kind of methodologic aspect of inefficient mapping. I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you so much. Please do contact me if you're interested in finding out more. I would love to hear from you. And I would love to see what you do with the session. I just really thank you for coming along. And I can't wait to see some of the work that you do and hear from everyone there. Just many thanks for participating. Thank you.